I have an invitation.
The black woman in the plain charcoal suit said, her voice steady and polite as she held out the cream cardstock. Roland Ashford's head snapped up, his face twisting into a cold, amused sneer of pure condescension. He didn't look at the card. He looked at her skin, her clothes, and decided she didn't exist.
My dear, I don't know what kitchen you crawled out of, or which trash can you found this in, but look around! Honey, people like you don't get invitations to a $4 billion night. You belong at the public overlook with the rest of the help, not standing on my steel.
With 2 fingers, he deliberately held the invitation out over the railing and let it go, watching it plummet 30 stories into the dark ocean below the bridge. While his vice president barked a laugh, the woman did not cry. She did not shout. She just looked up at the great golden cable holding the whole bridge in the air. And a quiet, dangerous smile touched her lips. She knew what the lion of the span did not. He thought he was throwing away a beggar's ticket. He had no idea he had just dropped his own future into the sea. And the woman he had erased was the only person alive who could save him. That sound, a piece of paper, falling into the ocean. A sound so small, the 4 television cameras on that bridge did not even catch it. That is the sound I could not get out of my head for 2 weeks. I'm Cole. I go looking for the receipts that important people burn. I find the names that got scrubbed off the plaque before they cast it in bronze. The polished people in the polished rooms. They think the story ends when the last witness gets old and the last document goes into a shredder. Most of the time, they are right. That is the part nobody tells you. Most of the time, they win. And the truth dies quiet in a file cabinet. And the bronze plaque says whatever they paid for it to say. But sometimes one of them gets greedy. Sometimes one of them builds something so big, so beautiful, so impossible to ignore, that the lie has to stand out in the open, under 10,000 lights, where anybody can walk up and check the math. This is the story of a bridge. It is the story of the man whose name is carved into the stone at both ends of it. And it is the story of the woman whose name is not the woman who actually figured out how to make 4,000 feet of steel hang in the air over the Atlantic without falling into it, and who got erased so completely that 25 years later, the man who erased her could stand 3 feet away from her and drop her invitation into the sea. They almost got away with it. I want you to understand that, not they might have. They almost did. The bridge was built. The awards were handed out. The textbooks were printed. For 25 years, a generation of engineering students learned a method, a famous method, and learned the wrong name to call it. This is the night the right name came back. So if you have ever done the work and watched somebody else carry it across the stage, sit with this one. Don't scroll. The water under that bridge has been keeping a secret for a long time. And tonight it gives it back. To understand what Roland Ashford stole, you have to understand what the Meridian Span actually was. The harbor it crosses is one of the oldest working ports in America. 250 years ago, ships came into that water, carrying human beings in chains, and went back out carrying the cotton. Those human beings were forced to pick. The city on the western shore was built on that trade, and never quite stopped being ashamed of it. And for 2 centuries, the strait that split the city in 2 was crossed by ferries and, later, by a low gray bridge that shook in a strong wind and could not carry the traffic of a growing region. By the turn of the century, everyone agreed. The city needed a new crossing, a great one, a span long enough to clear the shipping channel in a single leap, tall enough for the largest container ships in the world to pass beneath, and beautiful enough to become the thing the postcards showed instead of the thing the history books were ashamed of. Every major engineering firm in the country said it could not be done. Not for that budget. Not over that channel. Not in the soft harbor mud that would not hold a conventional anchorage. The wind alone was a killing problem. A suspension bridge that long flexes in the wind, the way a guitar string flexes when you pluck it. And if the wind hits it at the wrong rhythm, the bridge begins to gallop, and a galloping bridge tears itself apart. It had happened before. Engineers have nightmares about it. The longer the span, the worse the gallop, and the Meridian was going to be the longest span anyone had ever attempted on that coast. The firm that finally won the commission was Ashford and Crane, and the man who stood up in front of the city council and promised them he had solved. The wind was Roland Ashford. He was 42 years old then. He stood at the front of the room, and he said, in the calm, fatherly voice that would one day become famous, that his firm had developed a new method, a way of distributing the dynamic wind load across the main cables so that the energy of the gallop dispersed before it could ever build. He called it, in the patent, and in the papers, and in the 3 textbooks that would follow, the Ashford load distribution method, and it worked. The bridge went up. It cleared the channel in one leap. The wind came, year after year, the great storms that come up that coast in the autumn, and the Meridian Span held, and barely moved, and became exactly what the city had paid for. The shameful gray water, with the beautiful golden bridge above it. Roland Ashford became the most celebrated structural engineer alive. The method made him, not the bridge. The idea. Anyone can pour concrete. What Ashford sold. What made his firm worth. What it was worth. What was about to win him. $4 billion of federal money for a new project called the Gulf Causeway was the reputation of the man who had figured out how to make the wind let go of the steel. The man who had solved the unsolvable problem. The one mind that mattered. That was the legend. He had told it so many times, he could tell it in his sleep. And tonight, on the deck of the bridge that proved it, he was going to tell it one more time. On camera, to 800 of the most powerful people in his field, with the office of the Secretary of Transportation in the front row, and a $4 billion pen waiting on a velvet cushion. There was only one problem with the legend. Roland Ashford had not solved the wind. A 26-year-old junior engineer in his firm had solved the wind. In the spring of 1999, working alone at a drafting table after hours, filling a leather portfolio with the calculations. And her name was Imani Hayes. And Roland Ashford had spent the last 25 years making very sure that nobody alive remembered it. She was not born to elite rooms. Imani Hayes grew up 4 miles from that harbor, in a row house in the old shipyard district. The daughter of a man who spent 30 years welding the hulls of Navy ships in the yard, across the water. Her father's name was Cornelius Hayes. He came home every night smelling of slag and salt water, with his forearms scarred from 40 years of sparks. And he believed 2 things about his daughter with the whole quiet force of his heart: that she was smarter than anyone he had ever met, and that the world would try very hard not to notice. He was right about both. Cornelius could not do the kind of mathematics his daughter could do. He had left school at 15 to work, but he understood structure in his hands the way a sailor understands the sea. He would take her out onto the old gray bridge when she was small, and make her put her palm flat against the railing in a high wind, and feel it move. Feel that, he would say. She's alive. Every bridge is alive. The trick isn't making her stand still. The trick is letting her move just enough that the wind gives up trying to knock her down. Imani was 9 years old the first time she felt a bridge breathe. She decided that night what she was going to be. She was the first person in her family to finish college. She went on a scholarship. She worked 2 jobs. She graduated at the top of her engineering class. And when Ashford and Crane offered her a junior position, the most prestigious firm in the country, reaching down into the shipyard district to pull out one brilliant girl, her father wept at the kitchen table. He took her to a thrift store downtown, and he bought her the only thing he could afford, that he thought a real engineer should own: a soft leather portfolio, secondhand, with somebody else's initials worn off the front corner. Now you carry your work in something that respects it, he said. She carried it into Ashford and Crane in the fall of 1998. She carried it every single day after that, for the rest of her life. In those days, the firm was wrestling with the Meridian Commission, and the wind problem was eating them alive. Ashford had a team of senior men working on it, and they were getting nowhere, because they were all trying to solve it the same way, by making the bridge stiffer, heavier, more rigid, fighting the wind with brute mass. Imani sat at the bottom of that team, the youngest person in the room, a black woman in a firm where there were almost no black women, and she was given the work that nobody else wanted, running the dynamic load simulations, over and over, hundreds of them, late into the night. And somewhere in those hundreds of simulations, she felt it, the thing her father had taught her on the gray bridge when she was 9 years old. They were fighting the wind. You do not fight the wind. You let the cable give in a controlled, distributed, mathematically precise way, so that the energy of the gallop disperses across the whole length of the span before it can build into anything strong enough to tear. It was the opposite of everything the senior men were trying. It was elegant where they were brutal, and it worked. She proved it. She ran the numbers 100 ways, and it held every time. And she filled that leather portfolio with the proof, page after page, in her own careful hand, every calculation dated, because her father had taught her that, too. Always date your work, baby, so that the world can never tell you that you weren't there. She brought it to Roland Ashford on a Tuesday morning in May of 1999. Just the 2 of them, in his office, with the framed letters from famous men hanging on the walls. She watched him read it. She watched him understand it. She was young, but she was not a fool. And she saw the exact moment the brilliance of it landed on him, the way his breath changed. And then she watched him close the portfolio and slide it back across the desk and smile at her and say the words she would hear in her sleep for the next 25 years. This is interesting work. Rough, but interesting. Leave it with me and let the senior team take a proper look. You understand. At your level, with your background, the review committee will not take a solution seriously if it comes in under your name. Let me carry it up the chain. I will make sure you are taken care of. She left the portfolio. She trusted him. She was 26 years old, and the most powerful man in her profession had just told her he would take care of her. And she believed him, because she had been raised by a man who kept his word. And she did not yet understand that not everyone was her father. 6 months later, Roland Ashford stood up in front of the city council and announced the Ashford load distribution method. Her method, her calculations, her father's idea about the breathing bridge, run through her mathematics, and presented to the world as the work of a 42-year-old white man who had figured out the wind alone when she went to his office to ask not even to accuse just to ask he was ready for her. There was an internal memo. She would not see it with her own eyes for years. But on that day, she only felt its effects. The memo, signed by Ashford, recommended that the junior associate Hayes be transitioned off the Meridian project, and it described her, in his own elegant handwriting, as capable but fundamentally unmanageable. Gifted, certainly, but not possessed of the temperament this firm can put its name behind. Within a month she was gone, and it was worse than gone, because Ashford was a careful man, and a careful man does not simply remove a threat, he discredits it, so that if it ever speaks, no one will listen. Word went out, the way word goes out in a small profession, that the Hayes girl was difficult, unstable, that her work was sloppy, and she took credit for things that were not hers, that she had been let go for cause. She applied to 11 firms. She was rejected by 11 firms. A 26-year-old engineer, with the most important structural insight of her generation, locked inside a stolen portfolio, could not get hired to inspect a parking garage. So she did the only thing left to do. She left the harbor. She left the city. And she started over, 3,000 miles away, with nothing but what was inside her own head. Because that, at least, no one could put in a memo. It took her 25 years. You should understand what those years actually were. Because this is the part the highlight reel skips. They were not a montage. They were not a brave woman striding toward triumph with the music swelling. They were long. They were lonely. For the first 3 of them, she could not get engineering work at all. And she paid her rent by tutoring high school students in algebra in the back of a coffee shop. A future member of the National Academy of Engineering, explaining slope and intercept to 15-year-olds for $40 an afternoon. Her father died in the 2nd year. Cornelius Hayes, the welder, who had wept at the kitchen table the day the great firm hired his daughter, and who never lived to learn what the great firm had done to her. Because she could not bring herself to tell him, she let him die proud. She sat by his bed in the hospital, 4 miles from the harbor, and held his scarred hand, and let him believe that his brilliant girl was out west building bridges. And she has said since that the lie she told her dying father is the only thing Roland Ashford ever did to her that she cannot forgive. Because it was Ashford who put her in the position of having to tell it. She built a firm of her own, small at first, out west, taking the jobs no one wanted. A pedestrian overpass here, a retaining wall there. The unglamorous work. The work that does not get you on a magazine cover, and doing every single one of them so flawlessly that the work began, slowly, year by year, to speak for her, where no reference ever would. That is the whole strategy of the erased, and she had learned it the hard way. When they will not let you be heard, you make the work so undeniable that it does the talking for you. She earned her doctorate at night. She published, under her own name now, 3,000 miles from anyone who could whisper. And her papers were good. Better than good. They were the kind of papers that get a person elected to the National Academy of Engineering, which she was. At 41, one of the youngest members in its history, and one of the only black women ever to wear the pin. She was appointed to the Federal Review Board that certifies the nation's largest infrastructure projects, and 18 months ago, she had been elected its chair, which meant that the $4 billion Gulf Causeway contract that Roland Ashford was about to win tonight, the crown of his entire career, the final proof of his legend, could not be awarded to anyone in the United States of America without the signature of the chair of the Federal Review Board, without the signature of Dr. Imani Hayes. She had not told them. She had let the invitation come, with her name on it, To the woman they did not remember. She had driven herself across the country, back to the harbor she grew up in, and parked at the curb of the bridge she had made possible, and walked up the ramp in a plain charcoal suit, carrying a soft leather portfolio with somebody else's worn-off initials on the corner, and inside that portfolio, dated in her own hand, May of 1999, were the original calculations for the Ashford load distribution method. You already know what happened when she reached the top of that ramp. Let me tell you what happened before it, and what happened after, before she ever reached Roland Ashford. The valet would not take her keys. He looked at the silver sedan, then at the woman stepping out of it in a charcoal suit, and he decided something about her in the half-second. It takes most people to decide everything. Service entrance is around the east ramp. "Mom," he said. He was already looking past her, at the black town car idling behind her, at the men in tuxedos spilling out of it laughing. Deliveries. Catering. That's all around the side. She did not move. "I'm a guest," she said. He smiled the way you smile at a child who has wandered into the wrong line. "I'm sure you are. The east ramp." She handed him her keys anyway, because she had learned a long time ago that a fight at the curb is a fight you have already lost. And she walked toward the light. The light was extraordinary. They had closed the Meridian Span for the night. The entire bridge, all 4,200 feet of it, the longest single suspension span ever built in that hemisphere. And they had strung it with 10,000 bulbs, until it hung over the black water of the harbor like a constellation. Somebody had pulled down out of the sky and laid across the strait. There were tables on the road deck, white cloth, crystal, a string quartet near the South Tower. 800 of the most important people in American infrastructure stood on the surface of the bridge in their evening clothes, drinking champagne, 30 stories above the Atlantic, celebrating the bridge as if the bridge had built itself. At the foot of the entrance ramp, a young woman with a tablet stopped her. "Hi there," she said, bright and fast. "Are you with one of the vendors if you're catering? The staff check-in is around the side. I have an invitation," Imani said, and she took it out of the portfolio. The young woman read it twice. You could watch her read it twice. She read the name, and then she read it again, as if the name might have changed. And then she looked up at the face of the woman holding it, and the two facts did not fit together in her head. And instead of apologizing, she said, "Let me just confirm this with someone." And she walked away, holding the invitation, like it was evidence in a case that had not yet been filed. Have you ever stood somewhere you had every right in the world to stand, holding the proof of it in your own hand, and watched a stranger walk off to ask permission for you to exist? And while she waited, the lion himself came down the ramp. And you already know the rest of that part. The cold, amused sneer, the crawled out of a kitchen, the 2 fingers over the railing, the cream cardstock turning once in the light of 10,000 bulbs before it disappeared into the dark over the harbor, the vice president's laugh. You know what Roland Ashford said? People like you don't get invitations to a $4 billion night. What you do not yet know is what she said back to him. Because before she stepped away to watch, Dr. Imani Hayes looked up at the great curve of the main cable sweeping into the dark toward the top of the South Tower. The cable, the load path, the single elegant idea that had made this impossible bridge possible, and she said, very quietly, so that only he could hear it, "You still don't recognize me." And Roland Ashford, for the first time in a very long time, felt something move under his feet that he could not name. Security did not, in the end, throw her out, because before the vice president could wave the men over, the night's host took the microphone, and the protocol of the evening swallowed the moment whole. There would be remarks. There would be a toast. There would be the signing. The machine of the gala began to turn. And, in the turning of it, a woman standing alone at the bottom of the ramp simply became part of the scenery, which suited Imani perfectly. She did not want to be removed. She wanted to watch, so she stepped to the edge of the crowd, and she took a glass of water from a passing tray. The server, a young black man in a white jacket, was the first person all night to look her in the eye and call her ma'am, like he meant it. And she thanked him by name when she saw it on his pin. And she watched 800 of the most powerful people in her profession celebrate her stolen work. She watched a senior partner from a rival firm laugh too loudly at one of Ashford's jokes. She watched the deputy from the secretary's office, a careful woman named Helen Park, work the room with a diplomat's smile. She watched the television crews frame their shots so the great golden cable swept up behind every important head. And she watched the way the room treated the help, the way it looked through them, the way a guest would hand a server an empty glass without breaking conversation, the way the catering staff, and the valets, and the young woman with the tablet were as invisible to these people as the rivets in the deck under their $2,000 shoes. She had spent 25 years on both sides of that line. She knew exactly where it ran. And then she saw the girl. The girl was young, 22, maybe 23, black, in a suit that did not quite fit, that she had clearly bought for this single night, standing at the edge of the firm's table holding a leather folder of her own, her shoulders square in the particular way that shoulders go square when a person is holding themselves together by force. Her name, Imani would learn, was Simone Carter. She was a first-year junior engineer at Ashford & Crane, one of 2 black engineers in a firm of 300. And she had been brought to the gala for the same reason. A firm always brings its handful of young, diverse hires to its galas. To stand near the photographs, Imani watched the vice president, a man named Preston Vance, walk up to Simone Carter with a glass of red wine in his hand. She watched him say something. She could not hear it. But she did not need to hear it. She had been 23 once, in a room exactly like this one, with a man exactly like that one. She watched Preston gesture vaguely at the great cable overhead. She watched him say something that made the men around him laugh. She watched Simone's careful square shoulders absorb the hit and not move. And then she watched Preston Vance, still talking, still laughing, set his half-full glass of red wine down on the white tablecloth directly on top of the papers in Simone's open folder. Set it down deliberately, the way you set a glass on a table, claiming the surface, and turn away, so that when the girl lifted her folder, the wine bled out across her night's work in a long red stain. "Careful," Preston said, without turning around. "You'll want to watch where you put things." Simone Carter looked down at her ruined papers. Her chin did the thing where you feel it start, and you fight it, and across 30 feet of crowded bridge deck, Dr. Imani Hayes caught her eye, and held it, and gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not here. Not yet. Don't give them that." And something in the way a stranger looked at her, a black woman she had never seen, in a plain suite, who looked at her like she was the only real person. In 800, let Simone Carter pull her chin back up and keep her water in her eyes where it belonged. Imani crossed the deck to her. She did not introduce herself. She picked up 2 clean cocktail napkins from the table, and she began, quietly, to blot the wine from the girl's papers, the 2 of them working over the ruined folder while the gala roared around them. "You ran these load tables yourself," Imani said. It was not a question. She had glanced at the wet pages. The girl's work was good. The girl's work was very good. "Yes." "Mom." On the South Anchorage settlement, the girl looked up, startled, because nobody at this party had any idea what she had been working on. And this stranger had read it upside down in 3 seconds in the dark. Yes. Ma'am. Yes. How did you? What's your name? Simone Carter. How long have you been with the firm? Simone. 14 months. A pause. The square shoulders. They're probably going to let me go after this project. I can feel it. I don't fit. Here. They keep telling me I don't fit. Dr. Imani Hayes went very still. She set down the wine-stained napkin, and when she spoke, her voice was so quiet, the girl had to lean in to hear it over the quartet. Listen to me. Simone Carter. They told me the same thing. In a room a lot like this one. A long time ago. You don't fit. I want you to remember something for the rest of your life. When a place like this tells you you do not fit, what they are telling you is that you are too big for the lie they are running. They cannot fit you. Because if they let you all the way in, you would see everything. Do you understand me? The girl did not understand her. Not yet. But she nodded. Because the woman's eyes were the steadiest thing she had seen all night. Stay close to me, Imani said, and watch what happens. A spoon rang against crystal. The string quartet went quiet, and Roland Ashford climbed the 3 steps to the small stage they had built at the center of the bridge deck, under the great South Tower, and took the microphone to the kind of applause that men like him have learned to mistake for love. Friends, he said, and the deck went silent for him, the way rooms had gone silent for him for 40 years. Look up. 800 people looked up, at the cable, at the tower, at the impossible golden curve of the Meridian Span hanging in the night. They told me it couldn't be done. Ashford said, every one of them. The wind. They said, the channel, the mud. It cannot be built. Roland. I heard it in this very city. In a council chamber. 26 years ago. He let it land. He was very good. And I will tell you what I told them. I told them that engineering is not the art of accepting what cannot be done. Engineering is the art of being the one person in the room who refuses to. Applause. He raised a hand to quiet it. Gracious. The lion accepting his due. People ask me. All the time. What was it? What was the breakthrough? How does a bridge this long survive the wind that would tear apart any ordinary span? He smiled, and I tell them the truth. There was a night. I was alone in the office. Everyone else had gone home. The senior men. The whole team. They had given up. They were ready to tell the city it could not be done. And I sat at that drafting table. And I thought about the wind. The way a sailor thinks about the sea. And I realized we had it backwards. All of us. We were trying to make the bridge stand still. But you do not fight the wind. He paused. And he said the words slowly, savoring them. The words that had made him. You let her breathe. You let the cable give. Just enough. In just the right way. So the wind gives up trying to knock her down. That was the Ashford method. That was the night I solved it. Alone. At a drafting table. When everyone else had gone home. And across the deck. Dr. Imani Hayes felt 25 years rise up in her throat. And she did not make a sound. Because she had decided, on the long drive across the country, exactly how this was going to go. And screaming was not part of it. But Simone Carter heard something else. Simone Carter, standing beside her, heard the woman beside her draw one slow breath through her nose. And Simone looked at her face, at the absolute stone stillness of it, at the single tear standing in the corner of her eye that she would not let fall. And Simone Carter, 14 months into a profession that had told her every day that she did not belong. We began to understand that she was standing next to something, and so tonight, Ashford went on, lifting his glass. We do not just celebrate a bridge. We celebrate an idea. We celebrate the proposition that the impossible is simply the possible that has not met the right mind yet. To the Meridian Span. He turned, theatrically, toward the front row, toward the careful woman from the secretary's office, and to what comes next, the Gulf Causeway, which this firm will be honored to begin the moment the ink is dry. To the future. 800 glasses rose. To the future. And it was at that exact moment, with 800 glasses in the air, that an old man near the back of the crowd put his glass down on the table, untouched, with a hand that was shaking, and turned, and walked toward the stage. His name was Eddie Boone. He was 74 years old. He had been a draftsman at Ashford & Crane for 31 years. The man who turned the engineer's calculations into the beautiful inked drawings that hung framed in the firm's lobby. And he had retired 9 years ago, with a gold watch and a handshake, and a secret that had been eating him from the inside for a quarter of a century. They had invited him tonight as a courtesy. An ode. Loyal hand brought back to see the great bridge lit up one last time before he got too old to come. He had not wanted to come. His wife had made him. Go see it lit. Eddie, she had said, you helped build it. Go be proud of it. And he had stood there all night with a glass in his hand, getting more and more sick, because he was the only person on that bridge, besides one woman he had not yet recognized, who knew that every word Roland Ashford had just spoken into that microphone was a lie, because Eddie Boone had been there. Eddie Boone had been working late himself, that spring of 1999, the only other soul in the building, and he had seen the young woman at the drafting table night after night. He had brought her coffee. He had watched her do the thing he had watched 100 engineers fail to do. Find the elegant answer, the one that makes you laugh out loud when you see it, because it is so simple and so right. And he had been the one. God forgive him that Ashford had called into his office to re-letter the Meridian drawings, to take the title block on every sheet, the little box in the corner, where the originating engineer's name goes, and change it to Erase, in his own beautiful draftsman's hand. The name I, Hayes, and replace it with the name R, Ashford. Ashford had told him the girl had left the firm under a cloud, that it was a legal matter, that the work had to be reassigned, and Eddie Boone had needed his job, and had a mortgage, and a daughter in braces. And he had told himself the lie that frightened men have always told themselves. It is not my business. I just draw what they tell me to draw. He had drawn the lie, with his own hand, and he had carried it for 25 years. And now he was old, and the girl whose name he had erased had vanished off the face of the earth. And the bridge stood golden over the water, and the man who stole it was about to win $4 billion on the strength of the theft. And Eddie Boone discovered that there is a limit to how much a decent man can swallow, and that he had finally reached the foot of the stage. The applause was dying. Ashford was just turning to step down, and Eddie Boone, in a voice cracked with age and shame, said the only thing he had come to say. Roland, tell them whose name was on the drawings. The deck went quiet in a new way, not the reverent quiet of the toast. A confused, prickling quiet, the quiet of 800 people who had just heard something they were not supposed to hear, and were not sure they had heard right. Ashford's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did. Eddie, he said warmly, leaning down to the microphone. turning it into a joke for the crowd. My old friend Eddie Boone. Everyone. 30 years, our finest draftsman. Eddie, have you been at the bar? A ripple of relieved laughter. Get this man a coffee. Tell them. Eddie said, and his old voice did not waver this time, whose name was in the title block on the original Meridian sheets. Before you had me change it. He turned, slowly, to face the 800. I changed it. I am the one who changed it. I erased her name with my own hand. And I have hated myself for 25 years. And I am too old now to die with it. There was a girl. She solved the wind. He took it, and I helped him. The silence that followed was total. And into that silence, from the edge of the crowd, a calm, clear voice said, "It's all right. Mr. Bone, you can stop carrying it now. I'll take it from here." And every head on the bridge turned to look at the woman in the charcoal suit, Helen Park, the deputy from the Secretary of Transportation, had spent the entire evening being quietly, professionally puzzled about one thing. And now, as the woman in the charcoal suit stepped forward into the open space at the foot of the stage, the puzzle resolved, and the deputy felt the floor of the evening drop out from under the entire United States government. Because Helen Park recognized her, she set down her glass and stepped forward, and her voice carried across the deck with the flat authority of a woman who had given testimony before the Senate. "Forgive me," she said, into the silence. To the crowd, "I think there has been a serious failure of introductions tonight." She turned to Ashford, and her face was not warm anymore. "Roland, do you not know who this is?" Ashford looked at the woman in the charcoal suit. He had looked at her 3 times tonight. He had told her she did not belong. He had dropped her invitation into the sea. And for the 3rd time, he understood nothing. Except now. Finally, the cold thing under his feet had a shape. And the shape was terror. "This," said Helen Park, "is Dr. Imani Hayes, member of the National Academy of Engineering, and the chair of the Federal Review Board." She let that sit for 1 full second. On a bridge that had just bet $4 billion on this man. She is the person whose signature your Gulf Causeway contract requires. She is, as of this moment, the single most important person on this bridge, and one of you dropped her invitation into the harbor. 800 people made a sound. It was not a gasp, and it was not a murmur. It was the sound a room makes when it realizes, all at once, that it has been standing on the wrong side of something. Dr. Imani Hayes walked through the parting crowd to the foot of the stage. She did not climb the steps. She did not need the stage. She stopped beside old Eddie Boone, and she put one hand gently on the old man's shaking shoulder. And she looked up at Roland Ashford, and she finally let herself be seen. "My father bought me a leather portfolio at a thrift store on King Street in 1998, she said, and her quiet voice somehow filled the whole bridge. "He told me to always carry my work in something that respects it. And he told me to always date my calculations, so that no one could ever stand in a room and tell me I was not there." She lifted the soft, worn portfolio in her hand. "I have carried this one for 25 years. Roland, do you want to know what is inside it?" She did not shout. That is the part everyone who was there remembers most. She had every right to burn the bridge down with her voice. And instead she spoke the way a teacher speaks to a room full of children who are finally, at last, ready to learn. She opened the portfolio in the spring of 1999. She said, "I was a 26-year-old junior engineer at this firm. I was given the dynamic load simulations on the Meridian project, because that was the work no one else wanted to do. The late nights, the hundreds of runs, and somewhere in the middle of the 400th simulation, I understood something that the senior team had not, because they were all trying to solve the same problem the same way. They were trying to make the bridge stand still. They were fighting the wind. She paused. My father was a welder in the Navy Yard across the water. When I was 9 years old, he put my hand on the railing of the old gray bridge in a high wind. And he taught me that you do not fight the wind. You let the bridge breathe. You let the cable give. Just enough. In just the right way. So the energy of the gallop disperses before it can build into anything strong enough to tear. She looked up. Those were the words Roland Ashford spoke into this microphone 4 minutes ago. You let her breathe. He told you he thought of it alone. At a drafting table. When everyone else had gone home. There was a person alone at a drafting table when everyone else had gone home. It was not him. She took out the first page. It was old. Soft. Slightly yellowed. Covered edge to edge in careful handwriting. She held it up, and the television cameras, which had come to film a coronation, zoomed in on it with the hunger of cameras that know they are filming history instead. This is the original derivation of the load distribution method, she said, in my hand, dated the 14th of April. 1999, dated the way my father taught me. There are 61 pages. Every one of them is dated. Every one of them is in my handwriting, which any forensic document examiner in the country can verify in an afternoon. She turned to Eddie Boone. Mr. Boone re-lettered the official Meridian drawings 6 months later. On Mr. Ashford's instruction, he changed the name in the title block from I. Hayes to R. Ashford. He will testify to that. He just did. In front of 800 witnesses and 4 cameras. Before he even knew who I was, the old man nodded, weeping openly now. And there was no shame in it anymore. But you do not have to take Mr. Boone's word. Ormine, Imani said. Because here is the thing about the truth that men like Roland Ashford never understand. The truth leaves fingerprints. She took out a second document. This one newer. A bound report. 18 months ago, I commissioned an independent metallurgical and structural analysis of the as-built Meridian Span, the real bridge, the steel that is actually holding all of us up over the water. Right now, I did it quietly. I did it the way you do a thing. When you have waited 25 years, and you want to be certain, and the analysis confirmed what I already knew. She held it up. The as-built load distribution geometry of this bridge does not match the geometry described in Roland Ashford's published method. It matches the geometry in my notebook, page for page. The bridge that is holding us up was not built from his paper. It was built from mine. He published a cleaned-up version under his name. But when his engineers actually had to make 4,000 feet of steel survive the wind, they used my numbers. Because his never worked. They could not. He did not understand the method well enough to get the published version right. The bridge is the proof. We are all standing on the proof. She let the silence stretch. I want to be clear about something, she went on. Because the people in this room are the kind of people who will want to tell themselves a comforting story about tonight by morning. The story they will want to tell is that this was an ambush, that a bitter woman waited 25 years and sprang a trap. So let me tell you exactly what the last 18 months actually were. So you cannot pretend it was anything other than what it was. 18 months ago, when I was elected chair of this board, I realized that the Gulf Causeway bid would eventually cross my desk, and that I would have to sign it, and that I could not sign my name under Roland Ashford's name in good conscience while I knew what I knew. So, I did not act in anger. I acted the way I was trained to act. I went to the Brut's General Counsel. I requested the original project files through the proper legal channel. I commissioned the metallurgical study from an independent lab that had never heard of me and was given no reason to favor me. I had the handwriting on these 61 pages examined by two separate forensic document examiners on opposite coasts who did not know each other and did not know the case. I built it the way I would build a bridge, slowly, redundantly, with every load path checked twice, because I have learned that when a black woman finally gets to make her case, she does not get to make it twice. It has to hold the first time, so I made certain it would hold. She paused. I did not spring a trap. Roland. I did the work. I always did the work. That was the whole problem. I did the work better than you. And you could not survive being in a building with someone who did the work better than you and looked like me. She set the pages down on the edge of the stage. Gently. The way you set down something you have carried a very long way. You taught me to date my calculations. I want that on the record. The man who erased me is the man who taught me how to make sure I could never be erased. You should have hired me. You should have put my name on it and made me a partner and let the firm grow rich on what the two of us could have built together. That is the part that should keep all of you up at night. He did not do this because it was the smart move. He did it because he would rather lose everything than share the bronze with a woman from the shipyard district. And tonight, he gets his wish. She let the silence stretch. Roland Ashford had built his entire life on his ability to look at a thing and instantly understand exactly what it was. He looked, now, at the woman at the foot of his stage, and he understood, finally and completely, that he had lost. And like every cornered man who has spent his life being believed, he reached for the only weapon he had ever needed, which was the sound of his own certainty. This is a fabrication, he said into the microphone, and his voice was still the famous calm, fatherly voice. But there was a crack running through the middle of it now that everyone could hear. This woman was let go from this firm 25 years ago for cause. For cause. Her work was unreliable. She was unstable. Difficult. There is documentation. I will not stand here and let a disgruntled former employee. For cause. Imani repeated. And for the first time all night, something flickered in her steady eyes. And it was not anger. It was something colder and older and more patient than anger. Yes, let's talk about the documentation. She took out a third page. This is an internal memo, she said, dated June of 1999, recommending my transition off the Meridian project. I obtained it legally, through the discovery process, 18 months ago. When I first contacted the Federal Review Board's General Counsel, it is signed by Roland Ashford, and I would like to read you the part where he describes the unreliable, unstable, difficult junior engineer, whose work was so worthless he had to remove her from the project. She held it up to the light of 10,000 bulbs. I am quoting him exactly. AIDS is capable, but fundamentally unmanageable. Gifted, certainly, but not possessed of the temperament this firm can put its name behind. She lowered the page. Gifted, certainly. She said it again, slowly, and let it hang in the air over the water. He removed me for being too gifted to control. He wrote it down. He dated it. He taught me to date my work. And then he dated my erasure. There is a second memo, she went on, and her voice never rose, instructing that the cable solution be presented to the City Council as developed in-house under R.A. That is me. I am in-house. I am the house he built his name on top of, and then burned down, so that no one would ever find me in it. She looked up at him one last time. You asked me, at the bottom of the ramp tonight, how I came to be holding an invitation to this party. You suggested I had found it in a trash can, that a friend in the kitchens had passed it along. A long pause. I came to be holding it. Roland, because I am the woman who solved the wind, and you have spent 25 years so certain that I could never be standing in a room like this, that you looked me in the eye 3 separate times tonight, and could not see me. That is not an accident. That is the whole machine. The machine only works if you genuinely cannot see us. The moment you can, the moment you have to look at the welder's daughter from the shipyard district and admit she is the most important person on your bridge, the whole thing falls into the water. She closed the portfolio. It is in the water now. Here is what Dr. Imani Hayes did not do. She did not have him dragged off the bridge by the security men he had been so eager to set on her an hour before. She did not tear up the $4 billion contract on camera for the satisfaction of the gasp. She did not call him the names he had earned. She had spent 25 years deciding what she would do if this night ever came. And she had decided that revenge is a small thing, a private thing, a thing that ends the moment you feel it, and that she had not come 3,000 miles for something small. She turned away from Roland Ashford, because he had stopped mattering, and she turned to face Helen Park, and the 800, and the 4 cameras, and she spoke not as a wronged woman, but as the chair of the Federal Review Board, which is what she was. I will not be certifying the Gulf Causeway contract for Ashford and Crane tonight, she said. The crowd inhaled, but not for the reason you think. Not as punishment. Punishment is between Mr. Ashford and the courts now. And the courts will have a great deal to read. She lifted the bound metallurgical report. I am withholding certification because the Federal Review Board cannot put $4 billion of the public's money into a firm whose foundational reputation rests on falsified attribution. Because if a firm will lie about who solved the wind, it will lie about a settlement reading, a weld inspection, a load rating. Integrity is not a separate thing from engineering. It is the engineering. A bridge is a promise that the math is true, and that the people who checked it told you the truth. This firm broke that promise 25 years ago, and it has been collecting on the broken promise ever since. That ends tonight. She let it settle, and then she did the thing that made this a story worth telling, instead of just a downfall. And because I have spent 25 years thinking about exactly how a thing like this is allowed to happen, she said, I am not going to let it end with one man's disgrace and a feeling that justice was done. One man's disgrace fixes nothing. There will be another Roland Ashford. There is always another. So, as chair of this board, effective immediately, I am directing 3 things into the certification requirements for every federal infrastructure contract in this country. She counted them on her fingers, the way her father used to count things on his scarred fingers at the kitchen table. First, provenance auditing. Every method, every patent, every innovation a firm claims as the basis of its bid will be traced back to its origin, with original dated documentation, before a single federal dollar moves. No more title blocks changed in the dark. If you did not think of it, you do not get paid for it, and you certainly do not get to put your name on it in the textbook. Second, an open archive. We are going to go back through the records of every major federally funded project of the last 40 years, with forensic document examiners and historians. And we are going to find the other names in the other title blocks, the draftsmen and the junior engineers and the night shift calculators, the ones who solved the hard thing and watched someone else carry it across the stage. And where we find them, we are going to restore them by name on the bronze. I promise you, Mine will not be the only one. Men like Roland Ashford are not careful enough to only steal once. Third, she said it more quietly. And she said it looking at a girl in an ill-fitting suit at the edge of the crowd. The Cornelius Hayes Fellowship, named for my father, a welder, who never set foot in a university, and who understood structure better than any man I ever met. Fully funded, in perpetuity, for engineering students from the kind of neighborhoods that build the ships and pour the concrete and never get invited to the gala, the kind of students that places like this one look at and decide, in half a second, do not fit. She looked at Simone Carter, and her steady eyes were not steady anymore, and she did not care who saw it. Its first recipient will be a young engineer named Simone Carter, whose load tables on the South Anchorage settlement I read upside down in the dark tonight, and which are, I want the record to reflect, excellent, and who was told by this firm that she does not belong here. Simone. Her voice cracked. Finally. Beautifully. All the way through. You belong here. You belong here so completely that they could not keep you in the room without you seeing everything. That is not a flaw. That was never a flaw. That is the whole gift. And across the deck of the bridge her stolen mind had made possible, Simone Carter put her hands over her face and wept. And the welder's daughter walked through the parted crowd and took the girl in her arms and held her, while the great golden cable swept up into the dark over the harbor that had kept the secret for 25 years and had finally, that night, given it back. I told you I could not get that sound out of my head. The paper falling into the water. Here is what I figured out. Somewhere around week 2, sitting with this story at 3 in the morning, the way you sit with the ones that will not let go. That sound was not the worst part. The worst part is that it was easy for him. 3 times. He looked right at her 3 times and dropped her invitation in the sea. And it cost him nothing. And it would have kept costing him nothing for the rest of his life. Except that this one time, this one impossible time, the woman he erased had spent 25 years becoming the one person on earth he needed. That almost never happens. I need you to hear me say that because I do not want you to walk away from this thinking the system works. The system did not work. She worked. She worked for 25 years. 3,000 miles from home. Rejected by 11 firms. Rebuilding a whole life out of nothing but what was inside her own head. On the small chance that someday she would be standing in the right room with the right receipts. The bridge did not save her. The academy did not save her. No night came across an ocean for her. She saved herself. And then she turned around and used everything it had cost her to make sure the next girl would not have to pay the same price. So when this one sits on your chest, and I think it is going to, do not let it sit there as a feel-good story about a bad man who got what was coming. Let it sit there as a question. How many leather portfolios are at the bottom of how many harbors? How many title blocks got changed in the dark? How many people are out there right now? 3,000 miles from home, carrying the most important idea of their generation in a soft, worn folder, waiting for a room that is never going to come. That is the part that changes you, if you let it. The clip ran on every network by morning. 61 pages of yellowed handwriting, dated April of 1999, held up under 10,000 lights by a woman in a charcoal suit who never once raised her voice. It was the kind of footage that does not stay contained. And it did not. Within a week, the live stream had been viewed past 50 million times. Within 2 weeks, the phrase, "You cannot fake a bridge," was painted on a wall in the Shipyard District, 4 miles from where Imani Hayes was born. But the clip was only the beginning. Because Dr. Imani Hayes was not a woman who did things halfway. And the open archive she had promised on the deck of the bridge was a real thing, with real funding and real forensic document examiners. And it went looking, and it found them. It found a black metallurgist named Walter Sims, whose alloy formulation had been published under his supervisor's name in 1987, and was, at that moment, in the steel of 200 American bridges. It found a draftswoman named Lucille Okonkwo, whose drainage geometry had quietly saved a major airport from flooding for 30 years, under someone else's patent. It found, in the end, in its first year alone, 9 names, 9 title blocks changed in the dark, across 4 decades of American infrastructure, and one by one, with ceremonies the families had stopped believing would ever come. It put them back. On the bronze, by name, there was a granddaughter, at one of those ceremonies, who stood up to speak about a grandfather she had never met, a structural engineer who had died young and bitter in 1991, a man her family remembered only as someone who had been cheated by the white firm, a wound passed down through 3 generations like a family Bible. Nobody wanted to open. She was a school teacher now. She stood at a podium in front of a restored plaque bearing her grandfather's name. And she said, through tears, that her whole life she had been told her grandfather was brilliant, and that the world had stolen it from him, and that she had half believed it was just the thing families tell themselves to explain why they never got ahead, and that she had not known, until the archive's letter arrived, that it was true, that it had been provably, documentably true the entire time, sitting in a file cabinet, waiting. He wasn't bitter for nothing. She said, he was bitter because he was right. And then she said the thing that the archive's investigators would repeat to each other for years afterward. On the hard days. Thank you for believing a black man when he said he built something. 40 years too late. But thank you. Dr. Imani Hayes was in the audience that day. She did not speak. She had decided, from the beginning, that the restored names should have the microphone. Not her. She sat in the back row. The row her father had taught her was the wrong row. The row for people who do not want to be seen. And she let herself, for once, simply be seen by no one, and weep for a man she had never met, because she knew exactly which file cabinet he had been waiting in, and exactly how long. Roland Ashford did not attend any of the ceremonies. He could not have, even if he had wanted to. The metallurgical report became the spine of a federal investigation, and the falsified attribution, it turned out, was the smallest of the things that investigation found. The loose thread that unraveled 25 years of a firm cutting corners it had assumed no one would ever check. The Gulf Causeway contract went to another firm, under the new provenance rules, rules that the industry, after a great deal of expensive complaining, came to call, simply, the Hayes requirements. Because that is what people call a thing when they cannot pretend anymore that it has any other name. Ashford and Crane did not survive the year. Roland Ashford surrendered his license in the spring. The chair named after him at the Institute was quietly renamed. He did not, as far as anyone knows, attend a single engineering gala for the rest of his life, which is its own kind of justice, for a man who had mistaken applause for love. As for the others who had been so certain, an hour before, that a woman in a charcoal suit could not possibly belong on that bridge, the world is rarely tidy about such people. But it was tidier than usual here. Preston Vance, the young vice president, who had poured red wine across a junior engineer's papers, and offered to have Dr. Imani Hayes shown to the public overlook, was named in the federal complaint for his part in the firm's pattern of conduct. And he discovered that the loyalty he had spent his whole career performing for Roland Ashford was a one-way street. Ashford's lawyers, fighting for the old man's freedom, gave the younger man up without a second thought. Because that is the other thing about a machine like the one Ashford built. It eats its own. The moment it stops being fed, Preston Vance does not work in the industry anymore, and the young events coordinator who had walked off holding Imani's invitation like evidence. She wrote her a letter. Months later, a real one, on paper, saying she had thought about that moment every day since, and was ashamed of it, and had left the events company, and gone back to school. Imani wrote her back. She told her that shame is only useful if you spend it, and that it sounded like she was spending hers well, and that she should go and be the person in the next room who sees the woman everyone else is looking through. People can change. That was always part of the point. Eddie Boone changed at 74, at the foot of a stage, with 800 people watching. It is never too late to put down the glass. The textbooks are being rewritten. It takes a long time to rewrite a textbook. But the new editions, the ones the students are reading now, no longer teach the Ashford load distribution method. They teach the Hayes method. There is a footnote in the careful, neutral language of textbooks that explains the correction. And the footnote ends with a sentence that the welder's daughter asked them to include, and that they did. It reads the method was first derived by I. Hayes, then a junior engineer, working alone after hours. Her original calculations were dated. Eddie Boone testified at the federal hearing. Slowly, in his cracked old voice, and when it was over, he found Imani Hayes in the hallway, and he could not get the words out. And she took his shaking hands in both of hers and said, "You gave it back. Mr. Bone, you are the only one of them who gave it back." And the old man wept and went home to his wife, free of a thing he had carried for a quarter of a century. He died 2 years later. Imani Hayes flew across the country to stand at his funeral, and she stood next to his daughter, the one who had needed braces in 1999. And she told her what her father had done at the foot of that stage, how an old draftsman had put down his glass when 800 powerful people were lifting theirs, and refused to die with the lie. He was the bravest man on the bridge. She told the daughter. Everyone else was clapping, and Simone Carter finished her doctorate on the Cornelius Hayes Fellowship. 4 years later, her dissertation on the long-term settlement behavior of soft mud anchorages, the exact problem she had been running load tables on the night Preston Vance poured wine across her papers, became the basis of the foundation design for a new generation of coastal bridges. She did not go to work for a great, famous firm. She started her own, small at first, out of an office 4 miles from the harbor, in the shipyard district, taking the jobs no one wanted, and doing them so flawlessly the work began to speak for her. She hung exactly 2 things on the wall of that office. The first was her doctorate. The second was a single sheet of yellowed paper, framed, dated the 14th of April, 1999, in a careful hand, a photocopy Imani had given her, of page 1, and underneath it, on a small brass plate, 4 words, "They couldn't keep you out." And Dr. Imani Hayes went back to being a quiet woman with a steady face, who carried her work in a soft leather portfolio with somebody else's worn-off initials on the corner. She is still the chair of the Federal Review Board. She still drives herself. She still, every now and then, They get stopped at the entrance to some event by a young person with a tablet who cannot fit her face to her name. And she still hands over her credential without a fight, because she learned a long time ago that a fight at the curb is a fight you have already lost. And because she knows now, the way you know a thing in your bones, that the room always finds out who you are eventually, the water always gives it back. One spring evening, a year after the night on the bridge, she drove out to the Meridian Span at sunset and parked at the public overlook, the same overlook Preston Vance had so generously suggested she would be more comfortable at. She got out. She walked to the railing. There was a wind coming up the strait, the kind of autumn wind that comes up that coast and tests the great bridges of the world, and she put her palm flat against the cold steel of the railing, the way her father had taught her to, when she was 9 years old, and she felt it breathe, the longest span in the hemisphere, 4,200 feet of steel, hanging over the deepest water in the harbor, giving, just slightly, under the wind, just enough, in just the right way, so that the energy of the gallop dispersed across the whole length of it before it could build into anything strong enough to tear, exactly the way she had told it to. In 61 pages of careful handwriting, alone, at a drafting table, 26 years before, when she was a junior engineer, everyone had decided did not belong. The bridge was alive. It had always been alive, and it had been holding up the truth the whole time. Out over the black water, waiting for somebody to come and check the math. Dr. Imani Hayes stood at the railing with her palm against the breathing steel until the sun went down, and then she got back in her car, and she drove home. If this story moved you, do one thing, for me, in the comments below. Tell me about a time somebody looked at you and decided, in half a second, that you did not belong, and tell me what you carried out of that room. Because somebody watching this is sitting on their own 61 pages right now. Somebody watching this got their name changed in the dark and was told it was just how things are done. Share this with that person. Send it to the young engineer, the night shift student, the welder's kid with the most important idea of their generation locked inside a soft, one folder, waiting for a room that has not come yet. Tell them what the bridge told us. They couldn't keep you out, and the water always gives it back. And subscribe, because we tell one of these every week, and there is always another title block changed in the dark, always another name at the bottom of another harbor, and always, another Imani Hayes, carrying her work in something that respects it, dating every page, waiting for the night the lie has to stand out in the open, under the lights, where anybody can walk up and check. I'm Cole. Keep your receipts.